Paul's final message, the one he wrote to his friend Timothy, and trying to glean from that text some things that we can learn about the nature of a safe church. We have found a couple of things from the part of that book that we have looked at. First being that we need to be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. The source of our spiritual strength, the vitality of our spiritual walk, needs to be in grace. We are so accustomed to that strength being in our performance and in our self-achieved rightness that the concept of us being strong in grace is very difficult for most of us to come to. I want us to do a little exercise. Let's just practice some breathing. Slow breathe through your nose, exhale through your mouth. Everybody just take a big one and then exhale. Now that's very cleansing to your body. Okay, now that you know how to do that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take all of that stuff in your head that says the reason God likes me is because I do good things. I want you to take that stuff in your head that says the reason I'm acceptable to God is because I perform well. I want that to be in your head now. You got it there? Now what we're going to do is we're going to breathe deeply and let all those little oxygen bubbles grab a hold of that thought, and then we're going to exit it out. Ready? Now we've got an empty head. Emptier, maybe I should say. Now, to complete the exercise, I want you to imagine yourself standing strong in the grace of Christ. And that grace has an essence that is raising up as you stand there. I want you to breathe it in deeply and let it stay there. And then exhale very slowly, okay? The grace of Jesus. Paul tells Timothy that he needs to hang on to the standard, to the truth, but his strength needs to be in God's grace. Brothers and sisters, we need to seek to live in accord with God's truth. That's obedience. But our strength needs to come from God's grace. And oh, what that does to us when we finally breathe that in. That's the first thing we've discovered. Then we saw last week that Paul urges Timothy to suffer hardship with him. Interesting that as Paul defines his hardship, Eric read for us the text that follows what we studied, that his hardship is not his thorn in the flesh, is it? He doesn't say, Timothy, I want you to suffer hardship with me because I've got a thorn in the flesh and I've asked God to take it away and he hasn't taken it away. That's not the suffering Paul references. Paul says, I want you to suffer hardship with me like a serving soldier does, like an obedient athlete follows the rules, like a hard-working farmer who never gives up his quest for planting and growing and harvesting. Timothy, I want you to suffer those kinds of hardships. And we talked about last week some of the areas in which you and I are called to endure. Much more than just this physical world and our physical being. We are called to be sufferers. And we talked about how we share and encourage and uphold each other in that suffering. That's part of what Paul is asking Timothy to do. Suffer hardship with me. There's a connecting force. We did this a long time ago. I would like for us to do this again. If you are a phone aficionado who is into texting, and you recognize a person right now that you know of who is suffering hardship, would you at this moment text them and tell them you are sitting in church and you're thinking of them? You are praying for them and their hardship. If you are one who has access to that and you know of someone, feel free to do that. The rest of us, I want you, everybody in here knows of someone who is suffering a hardship. It may not be physical. Those are perhaps the ones that Timothy's challenged to really share. Let's spend a moment in prayer for those people that we understand are suffering hardship. The text that we are going to continue with comes right after what Eric just read for us. Remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God not to wrangle about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. But avoid worldly and empty chatter, for it will lead to further ungodliness. And their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, men who have gone astray from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already taken place. And they upset the faith of some. Nevertheless, the firm foundation of God stands. Having this seal, the Lord knows those who are his, and everyone who names the name of the Lord is to abstain from wickedness. Okay. A safe church is a place where the nature of that church is that there is no word wrangling. That's what the word means, to herd up. There is no gathering up of words so as to become obsessed with those words. We're going to break down this text because there's so much in here. I want to begin with, first of all, the reminder. The reminder. Paul tells Timothy, he says, I want you to remind them. I want you to remind them. It's one compound word in Greek made up of hupo, which means under, and menitsko, which means to remind. Menitsko actually is from a base word. They're not sure which one. One of the base words from which it might come means to stay, and the other means to gnaw or to chew. The idea is simply this. Timothy, I want you to put this gnawing truth out there all the time. This is something people had never ought to forget because they need to continually be under this gnawing truth. They need to chew on this all the time. Remind them, the implications are the truth is easily forgotten. That's implied. If I'm supposed to be reminded, and if we need to be reminded all the time that we're under this, then it's easy for us to forget this. And the second is that if we're to be under this truth, then this truth has a major priority standing. If it's something I'm to be under, then something it's on top. This is an important message that Paul gives to Timothy. It's an important reminder. The reminder also comes with these words. It is a solemn charge. I want you to remind them and to solemnly charge them. The NIV says to warn. The King James and the New King James both say, I want you to charge. The New Living says, I want you to command. A compound word made up of adding through and witness or testimony. In other words, this is a spoken witness. I want you to solemnly charge them. I want this to be something that everyone gets to hear, Timothy. No one misses this message because it is important that everyone have it to chew on. Implications are, this needs to be a simultaneous and public warning, and there's some reasons for that. One is, there is a tremendous power in a communal command. If all of us hear the same thing and all of us are aware of the same command, then we begin at the same place to fulfill the same obedience. So it's important that this be a communal command. Also, the problem that Paul's going to describe to Timothy involves speakers and listeners. So if you just address the speakers to stop speaking, but don't address the listeners to stop listening, then you've only solved half of the issue. And so there is a solemn charge which comes as a public witness concerning this reminder. Solemnly charge them, he continues, in the presence of God. Compound word, again, made up of the Greek word in and the word for gaze. It has the idea of your eyes being wide open. In other words, astonishment, bewilderment, catching the attention. This is done in the gaze of God. Vincent, in his word study, says that it means in the full sight of the Lord. I want you, Timothy, to solemnly issue this warning in a public fashion, in the very gaze of God, in the very view of the Lord. Implications are that remembering that our actions are always within the gaze of the Lord tends to provide motivation that isn't there if we forget that truth. In other words, what we're talking about today, it applies to every one of us. It is being spoken so everybody hears the same message, and it's within the vision of God. God will know that I know this after today. It is within His full gaze that we look into His Word. That is the reminder. Now then, let's talk about the rule. The text outlines for us the rule. Remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God not to wrangle about words. Not to wrangle about words. Just one word in our Greek New Testament, made up of logos, which is that word for word, and makamai, which means war. Remind them, Timothy, that they are not to be engaging in word wars. This is the only place where this particular form of that word appears. It has a similar form in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 4, and also a similar impact, where Paul writes this: "He is conceited and understands nothing, but he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arise envy, strife, abuse, abusive language, evil suspicions, and a constant friction between men of depraved mind and depraved of the truth." So, let's look at the implications of this. We're to be reminded of a rule, and the rule is not to wrangle about words. We're not to be herding or rounding up issues that revolve around specific words. That's improper because why? Because such grows out of a spirit of warfare and fighting. In other words, this is not an honest discussion. This is for the purpose of waging war. This is for the purpose of getting my way. It's for the purpose of serving myself. This is not honest and open learning discussion. It grows from a spirit of warfare. The passage in 1 Timothy says it's rooted in conceit, ignorance, and sickness. I like sickness. That's a good word to describe what happens to us when we get all wrapped up in word wars, is we are overtaken in disease. Implications are, words, I think we need to understand, has a broader application than just warring over definitions, doctrines, and dogmas. In other words, when Paul gives Timothy the instruction to give this public warning, he's not just saying, I don't want people warring about a particular word, baptism. He is saying, I don't want people to have the attitudes that would lead to a warring over a particular word, over a particular doctrine. We don't need to have the attitudes that would lead to wrangling, to herding up so that we can outnumber, so that we can direct thought. That's not what we want. Words are the symptom. Fighting attitudes are the disease. No wrangling over words, because words demonstrate a deeper sickness.